523. Which of the following accurately describes the law with respect to security deposits on a commercial tenancy? And the answer is 2. There is no limit on the amount of security deposit which may be charged. Which of the following accurately describes the law with respect to security deposits on a commercial tenancy? With commercial stuff, there is no limit on the amount of security deposit. Wow, there's no limit. There you go. 527. Martha, who has been George's landlord for the past 3 months, has seized George's furniture from his rented premises and threatens to sell the furniture in order to pay George's arrears of rent. Which of the following statements is false? And the answer is 4. Martha has taken an action which can be described as a classic example of a private nuisance. So that's not true. There's what? He didn't pay. She's seizing his furniture to get the pay. And that's not private nuisance. No, that's false. But all these other things are true, saying that Martha has chosen an illegal remedy against George if the rented premises is George's personal residence. Martha has chosen a remedy called distress or distraint. Marcia has chosen the most effective remedy against George if the rented premises is a warehouse. If it's what? So this is, let me see here. Okay, so if the rented premises is George's personal residence, that's mean if he's actually living there, that's illegal. This is also called distress, and it's the most effective remedy if it's a warehouse. Okay, so if it's a warehouse, she can seize the furniture and do it. But if it's a personal residence, no. Anyway, so the false thing is she's taken action, which this is a classic example of private nuisance. It's not private nuisance. So, page 9, 549. The most effective remedy available to a landlord when a tenant does not pay the rent in a commercial tenancy is 3. Distress. Distress. Take over the shit. The most effective remedy available to a landlord when a tenant does not pay the rent in a commercial tenancy is distress. 558. When, with respect to commercial tenancies, there is said to be an implied covenant of quiet enjoyment, it means 3. That the landlord provides assurance to the tenant against the consequences of a defective title involving the landlord or those lawfully claiming under him. So quiet enjoyment is about assurance to the tenant against the consequence of a defective title. Quiet enjoyment is something to do with the defective title. You assure the tenant against the consequence of a defective title involving the landlord or those lawfully claiming under him. Quiet enjoyment. Oh, I get it. Okay. Say Tongwado here, the landlord has a defective title, but the covenant quiet enjoyment means that Tongwado will continue to do their business, have a quiet enjoyment, and they don't have to worry about if Ryokan or whoever owns this building, they have a defective title and somebody has a lawsuit, they're not going to be disturbed. 572, under the Residential Tenancy Act, the landlord is entitled to collect a security deposit equal to 1 half of 1 month's rent. So you can have a half of 1 month's rent. So now you said, I'm not in that situation anymore. Page 10, 616. One or more of the following statements correctly describes the law with respect to security deposits in a commercial tenancy. Let's do it. 3. Only C is true. And what is C? C is the amount of security deposit may be freely negotiated between the two parties to a commercial lease. And that is true. For commercial tenancy, the two parties can negotiate. So that's C. The amount of security deposit may be freely negotiated between the parties to a commercial lease. 655. Jenny has rented her apartment on a month-to-month basis for 2 years without a rent increase. She receives a properly delivered rent increase notice on July 31st, raising her rent from $7.50 per month to $1,075 per month effective November 1st. She feels this increase is excessive and discusses it with her landlord, but her landlord remains convinced that $1,075 is a fair market value rent, even though the applicable consumer price index, CPI, is 3%. Which of the following statements is true? Landlord is a meanie. Okay, for 655, the answer is 4. This rent increase will be valid only if approved for special circumstances as set out in the Residential Tenancy Act regulations. So this landlord is not being fair. He's going way over the 3% prescribed by the Consumer Price Index, CPI. So number 4, this rent increase will be valid only if approved for special circumstances to be set out in the Residential Tenancy Act regulations. So got to be careful there, landlord. Page 11. Page 11 says, in which one of the following situations may the landlord choose to give the tenant 1 month's notice of the end of the tenancy agreement? And the answer is 3. On September 1st, Kirsten moved into a small house owned by Jackson without paying the security deposit of $300 requested by the rental agent and according to the terms of the tenancy agreement. On September 30th, she tenders $600 for the October rent, but refuses to pay the additional $300 for the security deposit. So this is a situation, oh Kirsten, why are you so naughty? So the landlord could choose to give the tenant 1 month's notice at the end of the tenancy agreement because Kirsten is not giving up that $300 for security deposit, which is half of the first month's rent. 743. The notice requirement for termination of a commercial fixed-term lease is 4. Not required because the lease automatically expires at the end of the term. So if it's a commercial fixed-term lease, it's going to automatically expire at the end of the term. So you don't need a notice for termination. It's not required. The number 4, not required. You get it? 763. Which of the following examples would not entitle a landlord to terminate a residential tenancy under the BC Residential Tenancy Act? What is not entitled? And the answer is 2. Jean-Paul, a landlord, wants to give notice to Velma, a tenant, so that Jean-Paul's nephew, who is moving to Vancouver, can live there. Which of the following examples would not entitle a landlord to terminate a residential tenancy under the BC Residential Tenancy Act? So it wouldn't. So the answer is 2. Yeah. Jean-Paul, a landlord, wants to give notice to Velma, a tenant, so that Jean-Paul's nephew, who's moving to Vancouver, can live there. So the landlord could not terminate a residential tenancy in that case if he can't terminate this residential tenancy so that his nephew could come in. No, it's not possible. Page 12, 778. Larry owns a large gift shop. For the past 8 years, Marie, a jeweler, has leased an area in the back room for use as a workshop. Larry and Marie have an oral agreement that Marie will only use the workshop area during weekday mornings when the gift shop is not busy, so as not to disturb customers with the noise of her work. Marie pays $350 each month to Larry for this right. Larry has sold the shop to Theo for use as a restaurant, but he is uncertain what to do about his long-term tenant. You correctly advised Larry that 3. The agreement between Larry and Marie is not enforceable against Theo because it is only a license. Okay, do you get this here? The agreement between Larry and Marie is not enforceable against Theo because it's only a license. Okay, so it's a license. So it's just an oral agreement. So because of that, it's not enforceable with Theo, who basically buys the place and wants to convert it all to a restaurant. So it's not enforceable. So he's going to have to just say, sorry, Marie. 796. Patty and Henry sign a residential tenancy agreement specified to last for 1 year, commencing on January 1st, 2005, and ending December 31st, 2005, but not specifically requiring the tenant to vacate the rental unit at the end of the tenancy. Assuming neither party is given notice to end the tenancy agreement, which of the following statements about Patty and Henry's agreement is true under the BC Residential Tenancy Act? And the answer is 2. On December 31st, unless the agreement provides otherwise, the term will automatically renew as a month-to-month tenancy. So that's what happens. They've signed an agreement for January 1st to December 31st on 2005, but there's nothing saying that they gotta vacate. So it will automatically renew as a month-to-month tenancy after that. Wow. Page 13, 806. The duty to repair commercial premises is 806, and the answer is 2. Only A and B are false. So which of the above statements is false? So 2, only A and D are false. So A is duty to repair commercial premises is generally a landlord's obligation unless the lease specifies otherwise. Okay, so yeah, it is the landlord's obligation. And D, it is enforceable by a court only if the lease is in writing and registered to the Land Title Office as required by Land Title Act. So it's enforceable by court only if the lease is in writing and registered in the Land Title Act as required by the Land Title Act. So there you go. It is the obligation of the landlord to fix, like say if this Tong Mudo here, something goes wrong inside, the toilet starts bursting. That is the landlord's obligation to fix it, and it's enforceable by court if it's in, the lease is in writing and registered by the Land Title Office. Okay. 809, which of the following statements about periodic tenancies are false? And the answer is 4. B and D are false. B is where a periodic tenancy is created as a result of a tenant overholding a fixed-term commercial lease. The resulting periodic tenancy will be on all the same terms as the fixed-term lease, except the rent will be increased by 10%. So that is false. And then we've got, for 809, we also got D is false. So where a periodic tenancy is created at the end of a term certain commercial lease of 5 years, the new periodic tenancy will always be for a term of 5 years. No. It's not 5 years automatically. Page 14, and the question is 814. When determining the rights of a landlord of residential premises, one must look to many sources. You want to know the landlord's rights. This is for residential, not commercial. And so which of the above statements are true? And the answer is 2. Only A and C are true. And A and C, A is the lease between the landlord and tenant. That's the source of landlord rights. And the other thing is C, common law. So the landlord rights are found in A, the lease between landlord and tenant, and C, the common law. You got it? 828. Which of the following statements is true? And the answer is 4. The doctrine of Interessi termini is a common law rule stating that no estate in land passes until the tenant enters into possession of the leased premises. So this statement is true. Number 4 of question 828. The doctrine of Interes termini is a common law rule stating that no estate in land passes until the tenant enters into possession of the leased premises. 855. An assignment of a commercial lease cannot be made by a tenant to a third party. 3. If the tenant is specifically prevented from doing so by a clause in the lease. Okay, so basically sleep clinic can't do a sublease. They can actually, in normal circumstances, but they can't if 3, the tenant is specifically prevented from doing so by clause in the lease. So you got to have it written into the lease. You get it? Page 15, 870. One or more of the following statements are false. A tenancy agreement as statutorily defined, and the answer is 4. All of the above statements are false. There you go. This whole thing is just one big sham, one big lie. A, usually, tenancy agreement usually entitles the landlord to exercise the right of restraint of tenant's goods for arrears of rent. Okay, that's false. B, requires the tenant to carry out all repairs and maintenance of the lease. No, it's also false. C, must always be registered in the land title office to secure tenant's rights against subsequent owners of the leased premises. Also false. Why are all these things false? And D, must meet certain statutory requirements under the Commercial Tenancy Act of BC. That's also false. They made up this stuff. 914. Which of the following is not an example of a situation in which a landlord can end a residential tenancy agreement for cause? What's not an example? And the answer is 3. The premises must be vacated to allow for renovations which cannot be performed while the premises are occupied. This is not a situation where the landlord can end a residential tenancy. You can't kick out your tenants for renovations because you say, you can't do the renovations while the tenant's there. So that's not true. The other things are true. For example, number of persons permanently occupying a suite is unreasonable. Tenant fails to give the necessary security deposit when 38 days of the date required by the tenancy agreement, and the premises must be vacated to comply with an order made by the local authority regarding zoning. All these those are all true, but this is false. When the premises must be vacated to allow for renovations which cannot be performed while the premises are occupied. 3. That is not an example where a landlord can end a residential tenancy agreement. 927. Which of the following is not subject to the provisions of the Residential Tenancy Act? And the answer is 4. A house let for a 29-year term. If the house is being rented for 29 years, then it's not subject to the provisions of the Residential Tenancy Act. Can you believe it? 16. 956. Which of the following statements is true with respect to residential tenancies under the provision of the Residential Tenancy Act? This is true. 956. 1. All of the above. Oh my good nut. A landlord is entitled to give not less than 1 month written notice of the end of tenancy agreement to a tenant who, after 2 months of entering into the tenancy agreement, has failed to give the security deposit required under the agreement. So that's true. You can kick them out, give them 1 month written notice if they have failed to give the security deposit after 2 months. B, in cases of emergency, A landlord has a right of entry to leased premises. That's also a right of entry in case of emergency. C, a landlord is entitled to demand a security deposit not exceeding 1 month half rent. That's also true. D, with the consent of the landlord, a residential tenancy agreement can assign or sublet all or part of the leased premises at any time during the tenancy. That's also true. Is that the same for like residential? Holy crap. And E, the act has imposed on residential tenants a slightly higher duty to repair and maintain leased premises than exists under common law. So the Residential Tenancy Act, yeah, it's got a slightly higher duty to repair. And so the answer there was 1, all of these things. Woo! All the above. 971. A landlord has rented an apartment to a tenant under 1-year tenancy agreement. 3 days ago, at the beginning of the 3rd month of the term, the tenant failed to pay rent due as due. What action can the landlord take? 3. The landlord may now give the tenant 10 days written notice of the end of the tenancy agreement, and the tenant may avoid termination by paying the overdue rent within 5 days of receiving a notice. You get that? So there's a 1-year tenancy. 3 days ago, at the beginning of the 3rd month of the term, the tenant failed to pay the rent. So landlord 3 can give the tenant 10 days written notice of the end of the tenancy agreement, and the tenant could avoid this sticky situation, avoid the termination, by paying the overdue rent within 5 days. Page 17, question 974. One or more of the following statements correctly describes the law with respect to security deposits in a commercial tenancy. And the answer is, for 974, 2, which is only C. And C says the amount of security deposit may be freely negotiated between the two parties to a commercial lease. So you could, for commercial tenancy, the two parties can freely negotiate the security deposits.